Let's address 5 common misconceptions about the Elon Musk Twitter deal. Disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. I'm Mason Pelt for Push ROI. We are an ad agency. I did read the contracts. I did check with some lawyers who do M&A law, but this isn't legal advice. The first misconception, the dispute is about the total number of Twitter users who are bots. That's not accurate. Twitter doesn't report their total monthly active users as most social networks do. They use a proprietary metric called MDAU, monetizable daily active users. MDAU is supposed to show the amount of users that Twitter is willing to show ads to. And what Twitter reports in their SEC filings as far back as 2013, the last date that I checked, is that within the users they consider to be monetizable daily active users, fewer than 5% are bots. But the statement is rather toothless. I'm not going to find the exact language, but it was something to the effect of, we use significant judgment to make this determination. Our numbers could be wrong. They're really not committal on the 5%, though based on my experience, based on the ads that I've run and the behavior of users who click from a Twitter ad to a web page, I think it probably is around about that 5% number. You can get very organic looking click-through rates and on-site behavior from Twitter ads. Something to add to this whole discussion is Twitter's data is much better than the data that third parties can have. So even really well-meaning and generally competent parties like the follower wonk Sparkturo analysis that said the accounts Twitter is likely to consider in their MDAU are probably about 20% bots, are subject to this fatal flaw. Follower wonk and Sparkturo were unable to analyze private accounts. They also didn't have login data or behavior on the app data. They're guessing at who's in the MDAU, and then they're like doing their own spam evaluation, which I will say Sparkturo, excellent at spam evaluation. They're a very good product. Anyway, the data's murky, but let's just frame what's in dispute. It's not about total number of Twitter users that are bots. It's about the percentage of MDAUs who are bots. That's Twitter's claim, and Twitter didn't make a guarantee that it's fewer than 5%. The second misconception is that the contract is some unknowable black box. The number of comments I've seen from people who, anytime anyone, myself included, makes a statement about what is in the contract or what Twitter agreed to or what Musk agreed to, is met with, "Oh, so you've seen the contract?" Yes, they're publicly filed with the SEC. Twitter is a public company, and there's a lawsuit between Musk and Twitter, which has further put more documents and more communication into the public domain. This is an incredibly easily knowable deal. Probably the most public contract breach of any notable size we're ever going to have, and is kind of worth evaluating. What this all boils down to is speculation about what's in the deal is rather silly, kind of useless, and speculation about how deals generally work that isn't compared to this actual deal is also useless. So pick who you listen to carefully, but understand you can know the information. At least you have access to it, and assuming your ability to understand is substantial, you can know the information. The third misconception is that Musk can just exit the contract because of due diligence. I'm going to break my own rule and point out due diligence typically happens before the contract signing. You don't usually do much more than maybe an LOI or a highly contingent contract that is intended to get to the final agreement. Musk and Twitter have a binding agreement as far as pretty much anyone except Musk's lawyers are concerned. Let's kind of break that down, and I have some notes here that I'm going to look at. Twitter's filing with the SEC announcing the acquisition was in late April 2022. That stated, and I'm going to quote, "Musk also disclosed that his acquisition proposal was no longer subject to the completion of financing and business diligence." Okay, so the fact that Musk waived due diligence was widely reported because it was in Twitter's filing. This is not specifically the contract, though that same filing does contain the full merger agreement. This is a different thing Twitter had to file with the SEC for their shareholders because, again, Twitter is a publicly listed company. Musk has not disputed up until, July 2020, any of the claims that he waived due diligence. So we have between April 2022, tons of media reports and no dispute that he had waived due diligence up until he decides he really wants out of the deal. And then his lawyers say something to the effect of, Musk didn't waive due diligence. He structured this deal in this specific way that he kind of fairly clearly didn't. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer, but most lawyers seem to agree with me. So charitably, the facts are in dispute, but it doesn't seem very likely that they are really in that much of a dispute. There is an ever-growing pile of legal breakdowns. I have watched way too many of these, even including the arguments that Musk's lawyers have made that basically point out the contract reading is pretty straightforward. Musk was willing to accept what Twitter said and reported to the SEC as true, and then decided he wanted out of the deal, and then decided he wanted to do due diligence and wanted to evaluate their statements. And that is really what this comes down to. He had, in fact, gotten past the point of due diligence. Now, again, slightly in dispute. I don't really think that it is in any way other than Musk has some very expensive lawyers who have been tasked with dispute this, right? They're going to come up with the best argument they have. And the best argument they have is, at least as far as I can tell, fairly uncompelling. So the fourth misconception. Basically anything that involves the SEC telling Twitter or Musk to take any specific action. The SEC is an investigatory body and prosecutorial body for financial crimes, for a subset of financial crimes. The SEC could, in certain circumstances, take Twitter off of the listed market. They could take Twitter to court, but they're sort of like a prosecutor, right? Think about a district attorney. The district attorney can't just with godlike power do much of anything, right? They can only prosecute crimes. They can only bring actions. It's the judges that have the real power. Now, the SEC has a little more power than that, but if you come up with some version of events where the SEC is going to get involved and they're going to force Twitter to discount their share price by a certain percentage, and then they're going to force Musk to go through with the deal, that's a weird fan fiction. And then here's the fifth misconception. Pretty much any allegation about fraud. So fraud, as it would be here legally, is going to entail a couple of specific things. First, that Twitter's statements were incorrect, which Musk has yet to prove. Second, that Twitter's statements were knowingly incorrect, which seems almost completely unprovable, especially given that Twitter said essentially our numbers are mostly accurate, but they could be wrong. We believe these numbers, but it could be slightly higher, right? It wasn't like a guarantee it's not more than 5% bots within, and again, this would be within the NDAU. So in anything that involves, Twitter perpetrated fraud and therefore it's no longer a valid deal, just not likely to be true. And then one more kind of part of the fraud answer without re-explaining the MDAU metric. People are really, really bad at identifying bot accounts. You kind of can't do it just as a person. I replied with mild criticism of Elon Musk to Elon Musk, and I got at least 200 accounts that on the surface look like bots, meaning new profile or profile with few tweets, bad follower to following ratio, generic profile picture or no profile picture, linking out to like random stuff or nothing, no bio or generic bio, like all of those little check marks the human brain kicks in and says, oh, these look like they're not real people, going off. But when I would look at the things that these accounts would say, they very often appeared to be human generated to some extent or another. And they also, for the most part, didn't when I did data analysis of the accounts, have any sort of patterns that you'd look for when you look at bots, meaning they weren't all created in the same month. There weren't clusters of accounts that were created in the same month. They passed, as far as I can tell, the being human test on most of the accounts within my sample of 200 or so that replied to me that I chose to evaluate, though they looked like bots. So if you say, oh, Twitter has 30, 40, 50% bots, and your data methodology is, I can tell, you're probably wrong, right? So what this means is, to prove fraud, really I would say even to allege fraud, though you can just sort of say whatever you want, but to prove fraud, you have to show that Twitter was incorrect, which hasn't been shown, that Twitter knew they were incorrect, which is incredibly difficult to show and seems unlikely that it's true. And then the third thing, that there was actual harm caused by Twitter's statement, which also seems fairly difficult. Again, Musk bought the shares at a premium above what they were trading on a public market at the time. So I don't know how much of his analysis would have been, I evaluated the number of Twitter users and I decided to say this many dollars per Twitter user. That has certainly not been conveyed within anything that was posted by Musk or stated by Musk in the course of the deal, as far as I can tell. So anyway, thank you for watching. If not, click the dislike button. If you are a giant Elon Musk fanboy, comment on the thread and tell me I'm ugly for the engagement. I'm aware that I have long hair and a neck beard and I'm overweight. I'm aware I don't look like someone that does many $1 million deals. So go ahead, come at me, bros.